Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're really getting into the foundations of marketing strategy. That crucial first step, situational analysis.
Absolutely. It's something you just can't skip.
Right. Whether you're looking at entering a global market, maybe launching a new product, or even just trying to tweak an existing strategy, you've got to start here. This audit is, well, everything hinges on it.
It really does. A solid situational analysis. It's the bridge. It's what separates just random actions from a purposeful strategy.
Makes sense.
Yeah, you can't set goals that mean anything or put together a plan that's actually going to work until you know exactly where you stand internally, yes, but also how you stack up against the external world.
So this deep dive, we're grounding it in material from Marketing in the Global Economy, right?
Yeah.
Specifically, Episode 2 from the audio lecture series.
That's the one. It's tailored for MBA and executive students, so we're aiming for that level of practical insight.
Okay, so our mission today isn't just, defining SWOT analysis. It's about getting practical, globally relevant insights, auditing internal resources, really digging into external markets, understanding buying behavior, which is complex.
Oh, definitely.
And then pulling it all together into something actionable.
And we're drawing on a framework from a real authority here. This is based on the work of Professor Marc Opresnik. He's a distinguished global marketing thought leader. I should give you the proper intro. Marc Opresnik is the creator of the Pivotal Infinity Marketing Canvas and founder of Pivotal Thinking. He is Distinguished Professor of Marketing at Lübeck University of Applied Sciences in Germany, Honorary Professor at the New Delhi Institute of Management, a Global Thought Leader at the LSE Academic Speakers Bureau, and co-author of several international bestsellers with Philip Kotler. He also serves on the advisory board of the United Nations World Food Programme Innovation Accelerator, is a leadership coach and executive trainer, a TEDx speaker, and is recognized as one of the world's most influential voices in purpose-driven marketing strategy and leadership.
Wow. Okay, so that definitely sets a high bar for our discussion today.
It does. His work gives us that global context and strategic depth we need.
All right, let's dive in. The core challenge first, the internal analysis. Where does the value really come from inside the organization? We need to know that before we even peek outside, right?
Precisely. So when we're assessing a company's internal capabilities, strategists tend to look through fundamentally two different lenses. You often hear them described as outside in versus inside out.
Okay. Two perspectives.
Yeah, and understanding both is, well, it's critical. They really define what your strengths and weaknesses ultimately are.
Let's maybe start with the one people might know better, the external focus.
Sure. That brings us to the market orientation view, or MOV. This is that classic outside-in perspective. It puts the customer, their needs, their wants, their behaviors right at the very top of the list.
The customer is king, basically.
Essentially, yes. If you're truly implementing the marketing concept, you're adopting the MOV. It forces the company to look outward, not just at the customer, but, and this is key, to understand the competition from the customer's point of view.
Ah, right. So it's not just saying, hey, we're cheaper. It's asking, does the customer think that competitors' slightly higher price is actually worth it because maybe they offer better service?
Exactly that. The value perceived by the market, that dictates the strategy. But there's a catch. If you only rely on the MOV, your strategy can end up being quite reactive, just following, imitating.
Okay, so what's the counterpoint?
That brings us to the resource-based view, or RBV.
The RBV. That sounds like the inside-out perspective then.
Spot on. It argues that, truly superior performance doesn't just come from adapting to what the market wants now. It comes from what unique things you possess that others can't easily copy.
So it shifts the focus inward.
Right onto the organization's resource profile. What unique assets do you have? What capabilities? What knowledge? The core idea here is that competitive advantage isn't about being just, a little bit better than your rival within the current market setup. It's about having and using resources that are distinctive, really hard to imitate, or maybe even protected somehow.
Okay, that makes sense. So instead of just reacting, you're building from your internal strengths.
Right.
But how does an executive actually, audit those resources? How do you figure out if they give you a real edge?
This is where the RBV connects directly to the idea of core competencies. C.K. Prahlad and Gary Hamel famously talked about this. They didn't see competencies as just static things you own, like a patent.
More dynamic.
Much more. They're the underlying skills, the technologies, the way the organization works together, all combined in new ways to create the next generation of products.
Right, they framed strategy almost like a race, didn't they? Where today's advantages don't last long. There's that quote.
Yes, it really hits home the pressure, the time element. They said, few competitive advantages are long-lasting. Keeping score of existing advantages is not the same as building new advantages. The essence of strategy lies in creating tomorrow's competitive advantages faster than competitors mimic the ones you possess today.
Faster than competitors mimic. That means your audit can't just be about, say, cash flow or patents. It has to be about these dynamic capabilities.
Absolutely. And that leads to the question, how do you know if something is a true core competency versus just, a useful resource or something the company does routinely? Prahlad and Hamel gave us 3 pretty tough tests for this.
Okay, let's walk through those. This feels like where the rubber meets the road for strategy.
First test. The competence must be difficult to duplicate. Seems obvious, but it's crucial. If your competitors can easily copy it or just hire someone else to do it, its strategic value basically evaporates.
So it needs to be defensible through complexity, maybe unique knowledge, or even the company culture.
Exactly. And maintaining that uniqueness, especially now with globalization and everything being networked, that's probably the biggest challenge for companies today.
Okay, difficult to duplicate. What's the second test?
Second, the competence needs to be bigger than just one product. It needs versatility.
So it shouldn't be siloed.
Right. The test is about range. The core competence must provide potential access to a wide range of markets. The source material gives a good example.
Yeah.
Think about a company that's really mastered advanced display systems.
Like screens.
Yeah, exactly. If you have that complex skill set, it's not just for one thing. It lets you compete effectively in markets for, say, flat screen TVs, yes, but also specialized laptop screens, maybe augmented reality gear, mobile phones. You see, it's a foundational skill that can drive growth in lots of areas.
That's smart, leveraging one core investment across different opportunities.
Yeah.
Okay, and the third test, it's customer focused.
It has to be. The competence must make a considerable contribution to the customer benefits derived from the final product or service.
So even if it's internally impressive, if the customer doesn't care or doesn't notice,
then it's not a core marketing competency. If it doesn't significantly impact their satisfaction or the benefit they get, it might be an operational strength, but not a strategic market one. The RBV, the inside-out view, only really delivers value when it connects with the MOV, the outside-in view.
This tension then between the reactive MOV and the proactive RBV, that seems to lead straight into deciding your overall strategic stance. Are you going to be market-driven, or are you aiming to be market-driving?
And that choice really sets the pace for the whole organization. A market-driven company, that's the sort of general reactive approach.
Right.
They respond to demands that are already out there. They operate within the market structure as it is. They focus a lot on adapting, benchmarking constantly against rivals.
Like you said, reacting to the mail that arrives today, their customer focus is on figuring out and meeting current needs.
Correct. Now, the market-driving approach, that's about pursuing real, sometimes radical disruption.
Changing the game.
Exactly. The company proactively tries to induce fundamental changes in the market structure. It tries to alter how customers and competitors behave. It's a pioneering mindset.
That sounds ambitious.
Yeah.
And probably pretty risky. What does that take organizationally?
It takes a much bigger strategic commitment, absolutely. A market-driving firm isn't just answering today's needs. It's trying to shape customer behavior for the future. It uses its deep resource analysis, its RBV strengths, to figure out which future technologies might succeed considering customer preferences, and then it tries to push the market in that direction.
So their view of competitors isn't just benchmarking then?
No, it's about fundamentally changing the playing field. They focus on identifying and building sustainable internal and external competencies that actually set new rules for the market.
That level of ambition, it requires really seeing the whole picture, doesn't it? The company, the competition, the customer. Which brings us to the competitive triangle, I think.
Yes, it's a simple visual, but effective. It reminds us of those 3 core points determining success: the company itself, the competition, and crucially, the customer.
And the space inside the triangle represents?
That's the perceived value in the marketplace. By understanding how these 3 interact, your capabilities, your rival's capabilities, and what the customer actually values a firm, can quickly gauge how its value proposition stacks up, especially when you evaluate it against those 3 core competency tests we just discussed. It's kind of a quick check on whether your MOV-RBV balance is working.
Okay, so this deep internal look gives us one side of the coin, our strengths and weaknesses. But internal abilities only matter when you measure them against what's happening outside. So we need to pivot. Look outward now.
Exactly. Time to assess the external environment.
All right, moving from that internal audit, we now have to turn our focus outside to the market itself and, well, the constantly shifting external environment. That's where the opportunities and threats lie.
Yeah, that's precisely it. And the absolute key directive here is the need for continuous environmental analysis. It's not a one-off thing.
Not just an annual planning exercise.
Definitely not. The market changes so fast, the complexity is so high. A truly marketing-oriented company has to be continually analyzing the environment it operates in. This isn't just nice to have. It's the lifeblood feeding strategic planning.
Because if you only look once a year, the information could be totally out of date before you even finish rolling out the strategy.
Absolutely. Think about the environment. Economic shifts, new technologies popping up, political changes, new regulations, cultural trends. This is the dynamic playing field. It's constantly moving the goalposts for how you interact with customers.
And the output of all this continuous scanning.
That's how you identify the external opportunities and threats. Missing a huge technological shift or failing to see a new regulatory hurdle coming. That can completely sink even the most brilliant internal strategy.
And probably the most dynamic, most volatile, certainly the most complex part of that external environment has to be the customer.
Without a doubt. Which leads us directly into understanding them better.
Okay, so this section feels like the real heart of the external analysis challenge, getting genuine customer insights. That deep understanding of their needs and wants.
It is a core challenge, and the difficulty, as the source material points out, is that these insights are often not obvious. Customers themselves might not even be fully aware of their own motivations.
Or they might say one thing but do another.
Exactly, or they might just be unsure about the real reasons behind their choices. So the immediate goal isn't necessarily just getting more data. We're often drowning in data. It's about getting better, more focused information and figuring out how to use the data we already have more effectively.
Right. Better insights, not just bigger spreadsheets. So where does this information come from? What are the main sources?
Strategically, we look at 3 distinct sources. First, there's internal data. This is all the information you collect from within your own company network.
Like sales records, customer service logs.
Sales records, customer history, maybe data from your website, logistics information. It's usually the cheapest and quickest data to get your hands on.
But it might be incomplete, or stuck in different department silos, or maybe biased by how it was collected.
That's a common issue. Then the second source is marketing intelligence. This is more about looking outwards systematically. It's the collection and analysis of publicly available information.
So keeping tabs on competitors, reading industry reports, monitoring news.
Oh, precisely. Competitive monitoring, tracking marketplace developments, understanding broader consumer trends through public data.
Okay. And the third source. This sounds more targeted.
It usually is. That's marketing research. This involves the systematic design, collection, analysis, and reporting of data that's relevant to a specific marketing situation or question you need to answer.
So you commission research when you have a particular problem or decision to make.
Often, yes. The justification is clear. Management often makes decisions based on gut feelings, right? Or you have strong opinions inside the company about what customers want, but maybe those opinions clash or aren't based on real evidence.
Right. Research can cut through the internal guesswork.
It provides that objective baseline. It helps resolve those ambiguities.
And when we talk about research, there's this basic distinction between data that's already out there and data we need to go out and gather specifically.
Yes, the classic primary versus secondary data split. You always start with secondary data. That's information that already exists somewhere. It was collected for some other reason.
Like census data or market reports you can buy?
Exactly. The big advantage is it's usually quick to get and relatively cheap. But the downsides are significant. Is it relevant to your specific question? Is it actually available? Is it up to date or is it obsolete? Big risks there.
So if secondary data doesn't cut it,
then you move to primary data. This is information you gather specifically for the research project at hand. You design the study, you collect the data.
Surveys, interviews, focus groups, experiments.
All of those. The pros. It's specific to your needs, you control the process, and it's current. The cons. It takes time, often a lot of time, and it can be quite expensive.
Okay, so once we have the data flowing in, whether it's internal, intelligence, or research, what are the core questions we're trying to answer about the customer's behavior?
It boils down to those fundamental questions, sort of the 5 W's and an H. Who is important in making the buying decision? Where do they typically buy? Which channels? When do they buy? Timing, frequency. How do they buy? What's the process? How do they pay? And maybe the most critical one, what are their choice criteria? What features, price points, brand aspects actually drive their decision?
Getting answers to those is key. Let's dig into the mechanics of B2C buying first. Consumer behavior. The simplest models were quite basic, weren't they? Like a black box?
Yeah, the early model was the stimulus response model, the SR model. It basically treated the consumer's mind as this impenetrable black box.
Input, output.
Pretty much. You had environmental stimuli coming in, marketing stimuli you control, like the 4 Ps, product, price, place, promotion, and other stimuli you don't control, like economic conditions or cultural factors. And these stimuli led directly to the buyer's response, buying the product, choosing a brand, etc.
Useful for a simple picture, but it doesn't really explain why different people react differently.
Exactly. It missed the individual variability. That's why the more advanced framework emerged. The stimulus organism response model, or SOR.
Okay, so what's the O? The organism.
The organism represents the buyer's internal processes, the stuff happening inside the black box. It includes 2 big areas. First, consumer psychology, things like motivation, perception, learning, beliefs, attitudes, emotions, attention.
All the mental stuff.
Right. And second, consumer characteristics, cultural factors, social influences like family or reference groups, personal factors, age, lifestyle, personality, economic situation.
So the SOR model says the stimulus S hits the organism O, gets processed based on their psychology and characteristics, and then leads to the response.
Precisely. The strategic insight here is huge. You have to understand how the organism, the individual consumer, filters and processes your marketing message or any other stimulus. The effectiveness of, say, a price cut depends entirely on how that consumer perceives it, their motivation, their attitudes, all dictated by the O.
And how complex that internal processing is. That must depend a lot on what kind of purchase it is, right? Like buying salt versus buying a car.
Absolutely. That's the concept of involvement, the level of personal relevance or importance a consumer attaches to a purchase decision. Let's compare a low-involvement purchase journey to a high-involvement one.
Okay. Low involvement. Like buying toothpaste.
Probably. You might notice you're running low. That's minor problem awareness. You probably won't do much information searching, maybe just grab the usual brand or one on sale. You'll evaluate very few alternatives, maybe on just 1 or 2 criteria like price or flavor, and after you buy it, very little post-purchase thought, maybe none. It could just be habit.
Right. Simple, quick, now high involvement. Buying a house.
Definitely high involvement. The problem awareness is major, personally significant. You'll likely do an extensive information search online, talking to people, visiting properties. You'll evaluate many alternatives based on many criteria: location, size, price, conditions, schools, and after the purchase. You'll likely do a lot of post-purchase evaluation, maybe even looking for information that confirms you made the right choice to reduce any anxiety.
Big difference. And these different involvement levels probably need different models to predict the behavior.
They do. For high involvement decisions where there's a lot of thinking and evaluation, we often use more rational models. A classic one is the Fishbein and Asen model of reasoned action.
Reasoned action sounds cognitive.
It is. It suggests a sequence, a consumer's attitudes towards the behavior, like buying a specific car, and the subjective norms, what they think important others would want them to do, together influence their purchase intention. And that conscious intention then leads logically to the actual purchase. It views the consumer as a planner, weighing things up.
Okay, makes sense for big decisions. But what about those low involvement routine buys, like the toothpaste or grabbing coffee?
For those, the process seems much less conscious, much more about habit or simple reinforcement. A model like the Ehrenberg and Goodhart repeat purchase model fits better here.
How does that work?
It suggests a much simpler sequence. Trial, maybe. You try a new coffee brand on impulse. That leads to awareness. If the trial was okay, maybe satisfactory, that can lead directly to a repeat purchase.
So the trial comes before any strong attitude forms.
Often, yes. In low involvement, you might act first and form the attitude later, or the attitude might remain quite weak. It's very different from the deliberate process in high involvement.
Okay, that covers a lot on the consumer side. Now let's switch gears completely. What about the business-to-business B2B market? The dynamics must be totally different when a company buys from another company.
Fundamentally different in many ways. We're not usually dealing with a single individual making an emotional choice anymore. We're dealing with organizational needs, often complex technical requirements, and group dynamics.
Group dynamics.
Yeah.
So the key difference is probably group decision-making.
That's the defining characteristic. Organizational buying almost always involves a group of people, a process. We call this group the decision-making unit, DMU, or sometimes the buying center. If you're a B2B marketer, you absolutely have to understand how to navigate this structure.
So the complexity isn't just the product, it's understanding who's actually involved in the decision inside the client company. What are the key roles we need to identify in that buying center?
The models typically identify about 6 core roles. And remember, one person can play multiple roles, or several people might share one role.
Yeah, okay, who are they?
First, you have the initiators. They're the ones who first recognize a need or problem and get the process started. Often, this might be someone who will actually use the product or service.
Makes sense.
Then come the users, the people who will actually use what's being purchased. They're often crucial in helping define the product specifications.
Okay, initiators start it, users define the need. Who else?
Next are the influencers, or sometimes called evaluators. These people affect the buying decision, often by helping define specifications or providing information for evaluating alternatives. Technical personnel are often really important influencers, especially for complex products.
Got it. Influencers shape the criteria. Who controls the flow of information?
Those are the gatekeepers. They control information flow to others in the buying center. A purchasing agent, for example, might act as a gatekeeper by deciding which salespeople get appointments with engineers or users. They can hold significant power.
Interesting. So who actually makes the final call?
That's the decider. This is the person or people who have the formal or sometimes informal power to select or approve the final supplier or brand. It might be a senior manager or head of engineering or the purchasing manager, depending on the purchase.
Okay, the decider approves it. Is that the same as the person who handles the transaction?
Not always. That's the final role, the purchaser. This person has the formal authority to select the supplier and arrange the purchase terms. They negotiate the contract, handle the paperwork. Crucially, as you noted, the decider and the purchaser might be different individuals. You need to know who holds which power.
Wow, okay, that's definitely more complex than a single consumer deciding. If we were to quickly compare B2B and B2C buying side by side on some key factors, what would stand out?
Several things jump out immediately and explain why the marketing approach has to be so different. Take market structure. B2C markets are typically mass markets, geographically spread out, often with intense, almost pure competition.
Whereas B2B?
B2B markets are often geographically concentrated think industry clusters. There are relatively few buyers compared to consumer markets, and the competition is often oligopolistic, just a few large players dominating.
And the size of purchase?
Huge difference. B2B purchases are often extremely large, major capital equipment, large quantities of raw materials, complex systems. B2C purchases are usually small, individual transactions.
What about the buyer behavior itself, the motivations?
In B2B, the emphasis is much more on functional, rational motives. Professionalism is expected. Decisions often follow formal procedures. And there's a strong focus on building stable, long-term relationships with suppliers. You often see long-term contracts.
Compared to B2C, which is more.
B2C buying is much more influenced by social and emotional motives. Family members might be involved in the decision. Loyalty can be lower. And it's characterized by many individual, often single purchases rather than ongoing contracts.
Okay, the differences are really stark. Rational group decisions in B2B versus often emotional individual decisions in B2C. But this leads us to something fascinating. You mentioned earlier neuromarketing. It seems to throw a bit of a curveball at these models, especially the idea of pure rationality, even in B2B sometimes.
It absolutely does. And this is where we have to confront the, frankly, massive limitations of relying solely on traditional research methods, especially asking people why they do things.
Because they might not know.
Exactly. Neuromarketing is this emerging field combining neuroscience, clinical psychology, trying to understand the subconscious drivers of behavior. And its core assumption, the one that really should make every executive pause, is that the vast majority of consumer behavior, maybe 90 to 95%, is driven subconsciously.
95%, implicit non-rational, compared to only 5 or 10% explicit rational thought-driving decisions.
That's the contention based on a growing body of research. It means everything we just discussed about reasoned action models, while useful, might only be scraping the surface, addressing just that tiny, conscious fraction of the buyer's reality.
Why can't people just tell us their real reasons then?
Because the drivers are often implicit, operating below the level of conscious awareness, they literally might not know the full reasons. The source material gives that classic example related to physical attraction preferences, like the waist-to-hip ratio, WHR.
Oh, yes.
When you ask people explicitly what they prefer, they might give various answers. But studies looking at implicit responses show a strong subconscious preference, around 70% in some studies, for a specific ratio, like 0.7 in women. Their conscious, rational brain often can't fully explain or even access why that preference exists. It's deeply ingrained.
Yeah, that's powerful. So the reason they give you might just be a rationalization after the fact, not the actual driver.
Yeah.
What about brands? Has brain activity research shown anything about how strong versus weak brands are processed?
It has, and it's quite revealing. Studies have shown that when consumers encounter weak or unfamiliar brands, their brains show high activity, particularly in areas associated with working memory and deliberation.
They have to think hard about it.
Exactly. They're expending significant cognitive resources, really thinking, evaluating the product, its claims, its worth. But strong brands, they tend to activate emotional regions of the brain more readily and sometimes show less activity in deliberative areas.
This is suggesting the connection is more automatic, emotional, implicit.
Precisely. It's like the decision requires less analytical heavy lifting because the emotional subconscious connection is already there.
And this reliance on rapid implicit processing,
Yeah.
it makes sense given the sheer amount of information we're constantly hit with.
It's almost a biological necessity, pure data management. Think about this. Our five senses feed the brain something like 11 million bits of information every single second.
11 million bits per second.
Astounding, isn't it? But our conscious, explicit, rational awareness, it can only process about 40 bits per second.
40 out of 11 million.
Yeah. The massive difference, the other 10,999,960 bits, gets processed subconsciously, implicitly.
So, okay, if the 40 bits is our conscious pilots carefully steering, then the 11 million bits is like our subconscious autopilot, handling almost everything else.
That's the exact analogy used in the source material, and it's a great one. Subtle cues, implicit codes in branding, design, environment, they guide our behavior, especially when our conscious pilot is overloaded, or when we're dealing with low involvement decisions, or we're under time pressure, or things are just too complex to analyze fully. The autopilot is really driving the bulk of our behavior.
The strategic implication there is huge. Marketing signals, product design, packaging, even sounds they need to be designed not just for the rational pilot, but maybe primarily for that emotional implicit autopilot.
That's the profound shift in thinking neuromarketing suggests.
Okay, this deeper understanding of customer motivation, conscious and unconscious, that feels like the ultimate payoff from the external analysis. So we've looked inside, strengths and weaknesses from RBV, MOV. We've looked outside, opportunities, threats from the environment, and customer insights, including the autopilot. Now we need the tool to bring these two worlds together.
Right. Yes. We need to synthesize. And that synthesis tool, the classic framework, is the SWOT analysis. Its real value is providing a structured way to summarize all those key internal and external issues we've just discussed. Put them all together, integrate them, see them at a glance.
It forces you to stop just auditing and actually start thinking about strategy formulation.
Exactly. It's the crystallization point.
So just to be clear, let's quickly recap where the inputs for the 4 boxes SWOT come from based on our discussion.
Sure. The internal analysis, auditing our resources, using the RBV, identifying core competencies using those 3 tests, understanding our market orientation, all that feeds directly into assessing strengths, S, and weaknesses, W.
Okay, S and W come from the internal audit.
Right. And the external analysis, that continuous scanning of the environment, analyzing competitors, digging into customer behavior in B2C and B2B, including those neuromarketing insights about the autopilot, that feeds directly into identifying opportunities, O, and threats, T.
Got it. Internal feeds SW, external feeds OT. But the real strategic power of SWOT, as you said, isn't just making the list. It's forcing the connections between the quadrants, right? Using things like matching and conversion strategies.
That's where it moves from just being descriptive to actually being prescriptive, driving action. The SWOT matrix forces you to think about strategy formulation by looking at 4 specific combinations.
Okay, let's start with the ideal scenario. You have strengths that line up with opportunities. 𝐸𝐴.
So is a matching strategy. This is the positive offensive combination. It asks her the question, do we have the internal strengths needed to really take advantage of this external opportunity?
Use your best assets to seize the moment.
Precisely. The strategic goal here is to maximize those opportunities by leveraging your existing strengths, especially those core competencies that are hard to duplicate. This is where aggressive growth and expansion strategies often come from.
Okay, that's the best case. What about WO? There's an opportunity out there, but internally, we have a weakness that prevents us from grabbing it.
WO is a conversion strategy. This poses a tougher question. Which valuable chances are we missing because of this internal weakness?
Ouch.
Yeah. The strategy here has to focus on converting that weakness into a strength, maybe through targeted investment, maybe acquiring a capability, maybe restructuring, whatever it takes to overcome the weakness so you can then seize the opportunity. If you can't convert the weakness, you miss out. The opportunity passes you by.
Right. Okay, third scenario, ST. You have strengths, but you're facing external threats.
ST is also a matching strategy, but this one is defensive. It asks, do we have the internal strengths, our core competencies, our resources to effectively master or at least mitigate this external threat?
Using your strengths as a shield.
Kind of, yes. It's about deploying your unique resources to neutralize risks. For example, using a strong brand reputation, a strength, to weather a PR crisis, a threat. Or maybe using proprietary technology, a strength, to fend off a new competitor's market entry, a threat.
Makes sense. And the last box, the really dangerous one, WT. You have weaknesses and you're facing threats.
WT points towards a conversion strategy, but often a more urgent, high-risk one. This asks the critical survival question. Which risks and threats are we dangerously exposed to because of our existing internal weaknesses?
This sounds like red alert territory.
It often is. This quadrant forces the company to think ruthlessly about minimizing those weaknesses and simultaneously avoiding the threats if possible. Strategically, this often signals a need for maybe rapid retrenchment, selling off non-core or vulnerable assets, or making radical internal changes before the external threat combines with the internal weakness to cause serious damage.
So the SWOT matrix isn't just a summary table. It's really a structured way to generate strategic options by forcing you to consider these four crucial interactions. It acts like the final gatekeeper for the whole situational analysis process.
It does. Once you've really wrestled with these four quadrants, prioritized the issues, and understood the strategic implications of each combination, the groundwork is essentially complete.
And the output of this, the application, where does it lead next?
It leads directly, immediately, into the next stage of marketing planning. The results of this comprehensive situational analysis, having clearly defined your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, provides the absolute necessary foundation for segmentation, targeting, and positioning, or STP.
You can't choose who to target or how to position yourself until you know the landscape.
You absolutely cannot define the battle plan until you have thoroughly mapped the terrain. SWOT is that map summary.
Okay. This deep dive, it really feels like we've mapped that terrain pretty thoroughly. It shows that effective marketing strategy has to start with this disciplined, two-pronged approach, looking honestly inside, using things like the resource-based view and those core competency tests.
And simultaneously, relentlessly analyzing the outside world, understanding the market, the competition, and critically, digging deep into customer insights from the rational B2B buying center to the, frankly, profound influence of the subconscious autopilot revealed by neuromarketing.
Yeah, that neuromarketing part is still buzzing in my head.
It's a game changer, and perhaps the most profound challenge for any executive coming out of this kind of analysis is grappling with that central tension, realizing that the majority of your customer's decision-making process, that 90–95% autopilot effect, is largely invisible to traditional methods. It can't be fully captured just by asking people questions.
So the big question becomes,
how do you, as a leader, design and implement a coherent, maybe purpose-driven strategy that resonates with a market reality you can often only measure and influence implicitly, indirectly? Answering that's increasingly what defines competitive advantage today.
a huge challenge, but a crucial one. Well, this comprehensive situational analysis really sets the stage perfectly for our next discussion.
It certainly does. In episode 3, we'll take these foundational insights, the S, W, O, and T, and start building the strategy itself. We'll tackle the essential concepts of segmentation, targeting, and positioning, STP, moving from this diagnosis phase into active strategic execution.
Looking forward to that. To continue this learning journey and explore more deep dives into global marketing strategy, we definitely invite you, our listeners, to subscribe to the YouTube channel of Professor Marc Oliver Opresnik.
Thanks for joining us for this critical exploration of situational analysis.
Thank you.